Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Before we dive into tonight's creepy story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a scare. Now, let's get started. I work the night shift at St. Helena's Medical Center. To most people, the thought of sitting alone in a dim basement room, watching security cameras flicker with low-quality gray footage, would be maddening. But for me, the monotony is a comfort. There's a stillness in those late hours, a quiet that seeps into my bones. People come and go all night on the upper floors, but down here? Down here, it's just me, the screens, and the occasional hum of the automatic door to the morgue. There's a strange thing about that door, though. It opens by itself sometimes, around 3 a.m. to be exact. My colleague Tom and I noticed it a few months ago when we both worked this shift. At first, we chalked it up to a technical glitch or maybe a sensor malfunction. But it kept happening. Precisely at 3 a.m., the door would slide open with that eerie, hissing sound. The cold air from inside the morgue would snake its way out, chilling the room for a few moments before the door slid shut again. Tom and I joked about it, of course. "Maybe it's the ghost of room 37, he'd say with a grin, referring to a particularly eerie section of the morgue where the bodies are stored for a little longer than usual. Or, guess they're just getting some fresh air. Gallows humor is the best way to keep things light when you're sitting on the edge of dread. But last Tuesday, Tom was out with the flu, and it was just me. I'd arrived at the hospital around midnight, picked up my access badge, and checked the feed from each of the cameras. The whole building was unusually quiet, even for a Tuesday. I'd been at it for a couple of hours, glancing from screen to screen, occasionally fighting off the urge to doze off, when the morgue door slid open. Exactly on cue. 3 a.m. This time, though, it didn't close. I blinked at the screen, waiting for the door to slide shut as it always did. But the cold air just kept seeping out, frosting the air in the basement hallway. I could feel the chill from where I sat, even though my control room was a good 40 feet from the morgue. I don't know what got into me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just the unspoken rule that if you're working alone and something unusual happens, you check it out, just to be sure. I grabbed my flashlight, forced myself up, and walked into the hallway. The door was still open, hanging there like an unspoken invitation. As I approached, I felt an icy draft wash over me. It was colder than usual, sharper, and there was a faint smell. Not the typical antiseptic morgue smell, but something metallic, like iron. I shined my flashlight inside. The bodies were laid out on their usual trays, covered with those pale, sterile sheets. Nothing was out of place. But the air felt wrong. Heavy. Dense, almost like a pressure was building up. I shrugged it off and started back toward the control room, trying to ignore the nagging feeling of eyes watching me. The door stayed open as I walked away, still not shutting like it usually would. When I got back to the control room, I decided to check the footage. Maybe I could see what triggered the door. I rewound the video feed to just before 3 a.m., watching as I walked down the hallway toward the morgue. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but then, something made my breath catch. As I zoomed in on the footage, I saw her. There, standing right behind me in the video, was a girl. Young, maybe in her 20s. She had long black hair that hung in stringy waves around her face, and she was dressed in a thin white gown that looked almost transparent in the dim light. Her head was tilted slightly down, as if she were studying me, and her eyes were pools of darkness, bottomless and empty. My skin prickled as I realized I hadn't seen her when I was down there. I hadn't felt anyone behind me. But there she was, clear as day on the footage, standing barely an arm's length away from me. I scrubbed forward on the video, watching as I walked back to the control room. She didn't move, just stood there, staring after me until I turned a corner. And then, just before I disappeared from view, she lifted one pale hand, almost like she was reaching for me. My heart was hammering in my chest as I switched to the live feed of the hallway outside my door. Everything was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. I glanced at the door to the control room. It was locked, of course, as it always was. But as I stared at the screen, I noticed something. The doorknob was slowly turning, as if someone were trying to open it from the other side. The door opened a crack. My stomach twisted. I'd locked that door myself, double-checked it. No one should have been able to open it without the keycard. I reached for my radio, my fingers numb with fear, but before I could make a call, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. There was a hum as the emergency generator kicked in, but it wasn't enough to power everything. The monitors were dark, the camera feeds cut off. The only light was the faint red glow of the exit sign, casting an eerie shadow across the room. I sat in the darkness, gripping my flashlight like it was a lifeline, my ears straining for any sound. A soft whisper echoed from the hallway, too faint to make out any words. I held my breath, listening, but the whispering stopped as suddenly as it had started. When the lights finally came back on, I rushed to check the recordings. Most of the footage from the past hour was corrupted, static and fuzz filling the screens. Only one clip had survived, a few seconds of grainy footage from the hallway camera near the morgue. In the clip, the girl appeared again, standing in the middle of the hallway, her head turned toward the camera as if she knew I was watching. She lifted a hand to her lips, as though shushing me. Then she was gone, the image blurring before vanishing into static. I saved the clip, even though I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof that she was real, that I hadn't imagined it. That night, I left the hospital before my shift was over. I didn't even stop to log out or hand in my badge. I just walked out, the clip of the girl saved on a USB drive in my pocket. To this day, I can't shake the memory of her face, the hollow black eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I haven't gone back to St. Helena's since, and I don't think I ever will. But every night, I see her face in my mind, hovering just behind me in the dark. They say the hospital got a new night guard, some young kid fresh out of high school. I wonder if he's seen her yet, if he's heard that door creak open at 3 a.m. It all began on one of those long, lonely nights in the office. Everyone had already gone home, leaving just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights that had a habit of flickering every now and then. Our building was old, creaky, and didn't have the charm that some people attribute to places with character. It just felt abandoned, forgotten. Lately, there'd been something off. Our boss, Mr. Redford, hadn't shown up for work in days, leaving his office strangely empty but somehow occupied. I noticed it first when I went to grab some papers from his desk last week. There was this scent, a faint and almost haunting cologne, the type that doesn't really belong in an office. It lingered in the air, a mix of spice and something darker, maybe even floral, and every time I walked by his door, it felt stronger. It was as if he'd been there just moments ago, though I knew he hadn't been. A few nights prior, one of my coworkers, Lydia, had mentioned seeing someone sitting out in the parking lot in a black sedan. She was a bit of a worrier, so I brushed it off. But she'd insisted. "Sam, he's just sitting there, watching the building. It's creepy," she'd said. And while I'd laughed it off at the time, tonight, with the emptiness pressing in, I wasn't so sure it was nothing. I had been working on some reports, my eyes heavy and my mind wandering, when a cold feeling crept over me. I glanced around, feeling silly, and told myself it was nothing, just the weight of staying late in this godforsaken place. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the idea that I wasn't as alone as I thought. After another hour, the silence got to me. I got up, stretched, and wandered over to the window, taking a glance at the parking lot. And there it was, a sleek, black sedan, parked just a few spots down from my car. And yes, someone was sitting in it. A man, from what I could make out, was leaning back in the driver's seat with a cigarette glowing in the dimness. He looked almost relaxed, except for the unsettling way his face was obscured in shadows. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe Lydia's words had taken root, but I decided to take a picture of the car. I lifted my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a photo, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. But when I looked back at the screen, I froze. The car was empty in the picture. I could have sworn I'd seen him sitting there just moments ago. I blinked, glancing back at the car. He was still there, plain as day. But the photos showed only an empty sedan. A shiver ran down my spine. I decided to just brush it off, telling myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe just my tired mind playing games. Still, the night was starting to feel much longer. Around midnight, I'd finally had enough. I was ready to head home, but as I packed up, I noticed something out of place. There, on the corner of Mr. Redford's desk, lay his passport. I remembered he'd mentioned an upcoming trip to Brazil with his girlfriend, Emma, some time ago. It seemed odd that he'd left it out like this, especially since he'd been out of the office all week. Then I spotted the box. The mysterious gift-wrapped box that had been sitting on his desk for days. Something about it felt wrong, but I wasn't sure why. I had this nagging sense that I should put the passport away, maybe even leave it in the box for safekeeping, as a sort of courtesy to Redford. But when I returned to his office a few minutes later, I was surprised, maybe even a little startled, to find that the chair at his desk had been pushed aside, as if someone had sat there recently and quickly gotten up. The gift-wrapped box was gone, and with it, the passport. A creak echoed from the supply closet at the end of the hall. It's a place we rarely open, and it's always locked, but tonight, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear faint noises coming from inside, sounds that didn't belong, a soft, scratching noise followed by what sounded like a muffled thud. My instincts told me to just leave, but something compelled me forward. With trembling hands, I pulled out my keyring, finding the key to the supply closet. I'd barely turned the handle when the door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I felt around for the light switch and flicked it on. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. There, in the dim light, lay what looked like a plastic-wrapped bundle in the corner of the closet. I could see traces of something red seeping through, staining the floor beneath. My heart pounded as I backed away, shutting the door and practically sprinting out of the office. I didn't look back. As I reached my car, I glanced up at the window. A dark figure stood there, barely discernible, watching me. My hands fumbled with the keys as I scrambled to start the engine. The car roared to life, and I tore out of the parking lot, refusing to look back at the figure in the window. The drive to the police station felt like a blur, but somehow I made it, breathless and rattled. I recounted everything to the officers on duty, showed them the strange photo of the car, and described the figure I'd seen. They listened, nodding solemnly as they took notes. When I finally finished, one of the officers stood, his face tight with concern. "We'll take a look at the scene, sir," he said reassuringly. "And in the meantime, don't go back there. Not alone." With that, I left the station, numb and shaken, hoping the police would unravel the mystery I had stumbled upon. Little did I know, though, that the truth would be darker than anything I could have imagined. The next day, I got a call from Detective Monroe, the officer who'd listened to my story at the station. "Sam," he started, his tone grim. "We need you to come down here. There's more to this than we thought." My hands were clammy as I gripped the phone. Detective Monroe's words had a weight to them that made my stomach twist. I arrived at the station as quickly as I could, feeling like I was walking into a nightmare I hadn't yet woken up from. Monroe led me into a quiet room, gesturing for me to sit. "Sam," he said, "the man you saw in the car, we've been able to identify him. He's Daniel Redford, your boss's younger brother." He let the words sink in before continuing. "He has a record, a long one. Assault, battery, even time in prison." A chill spread through me. I thought back to Mr. Redford and the strange cologne in his office. The gift, the passport, they hadn't been ordinary. They'd been part of something more sinister. As I sat there, piecing together the puzzle in my mind, Monroe continued. "We believe that Daniel was there to help his brother cover up something." He hesitated, his eyes dark and focused. "We found evidence in that closet, Sam. There were traces of blood, and based on what we've gathered, we're almost certain it belongs to Emma." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Emma. Mr. Redford's girlfriend, the woman he'd planned to take to Brazil. My mind flashed back to the gift-wrapped box on his desk, to the smell of his cologne, to the empty passport left behind. "It's a dark case, Sam," Monroe said, watching me closely. "Your boss, well, he had a history of violent tendencies. Not many knew about it. Emma had tried to end things, but we think he didn't take it well." The horror of the realization struck me as I pieced it all together. Emma must have rejected him, and in a fit of rage he'd taken her life. Then, to hide his crime, he'd called on his brother Daniel to help him cover it up. They'd hidden her in that closet, intending to get rid of the evidence later. But why had Redford's cologne lingered? And why did that black sedan keep returning, like a ghostly sentinel? I quit the office job a week later, unable to face those memories. I started working as a night guard at a hospital nearby. It was strange, being close to the morgue every night, but somehow, it felt safer, even comforting in comparison. It was one of those quiet October nights, just cold enough to keep people indoors, but with a foreboding stillness hanging in the air. I was at the airport, one of many stranded passengers after a long delay on Halloween night. The terminal was nearly empty, save for a few scattered souls, exhausted parents, a couple of teenagers wrapped in oversized hoodies, a businessman talking into his laptop. People trickled out as their flights were redirected, reassigned. But for some reason, a small group of us had been held back for hours. When the announcement finally came that our flight was boarding, only a handful of us remained. I remember feeling a strange sensation, like something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the time of night or the fact that everything felt unnaturally silent, but a chill crept up my spine as I followed the others onto the dimly lit plane. I found a seat near the front, hoping for some peace. The rest of the passengers sat mostly toward the back, and the whole cabin felt almost too large, too hollow. There were only 6 or 7 of us scattered throughout the aircraft, and it was eerie sitting in that near-empty plane. The air was stale, and the lights had a sickly, flickering quality, casting strange shadows that danced across the seats. Then, a stewardess approached. She was tall, with a severe expression that seemed out of place for a flight attendant. Her eyes were unsettlingly dark, like 2 small pits, and when she spoke, her voice was low and insistent. She asked if I would mind moving further back to sit with the others. I agreed, though I couldn't shake a feeling of discomfort. As I took my new seat, I caught the uneasy glances of my fellow passengers. Their faces looked pale, almost ghostly in the dim cabin light. I leaned in, trying to make out their hushed whispers, but all I caught were fragments, bits of anxious murmuring that didn't seem to make sense. One phrase stuck out. "They had to bring it on board." I was puzzled but tried not to overthink it. Perhaps it was just late-night paranoia. But then I glanced towards the corner of the cabin and froze. There, draped under a hastily thrown blanket, was a figure, clearly lifeless. It was obvious now, even under the dim light, that it was a body. Every muscle in my body tensed. I forced myself to look away, hoping that maybe it was some Halloween prank. But the expressions on the faces around me told me otherwise. No one was laughing. They were all nervously glancing between the body and each other. Time dragged on. My throat felt tight, my breathing shallow. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, to get my mind off the corpse just a few rows away. But the cabin's atmosphere grew even thicker, heavy with the scent of stale air and something else, something faintly metallic, like blood. Unable to shake the overwhelming anxiety building inside me, I excused myself and headed to the tiny airplane restroom, needing a moment alone. As soon as I shut the door, I braced myself against the small sink, taking in slow, deep breaths to steady my nerves. That's when I heard it, a loud, insistent pounding on the bathroom door. I jumped, my heart pounding in sync with the thuds. "Is someone out there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. But the pounding continued relentless, like someone was desperate to get in. For a moment I froze, unsure if I should open the door. Finally, I mustered the courage, gripping the handle and pulling it open. No one was there. The hallway outside the restroom was empty, still, and yet I felt a strange, watchful presence. I closed the door slowly, telling myself it was just nerves. But just as I stepped back toward the cabin, I was startled by the stewardess pushing her service cart directly in front of me. She looked at me with that same unsettling gaze, her eyes hollow and unreadable. "Are you all right?" she asked in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer. "Did you hear that?" I stammered, gesturing toward the bathroom. Her face remained blank. "Hear what?" she replied coolly, almost dismissively. There was something so off-putting in her demeanor that it took everything I had not to back away. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before she returned to her duties, moving that cart with an unnatural quietness down the narrow aisle. Back in my seat, I tried to shake off the strange events, but the air felt even colder, pressing down on me. I leaned back, but my eyes kept darting toward that corner of the cabin, where the body lay. The outline was unmistakable, and I couldn't stop wondering who they were, why they were here, why they hadn't been moved elsewhere. And more than anything, a sick, gnawing question haunted me. Why was it necessary to keep them on this flight with us?